Hello world and welcome to F1 Help. One more time with your host Lazarus. In this episode I will be going back to explaining the basics of Formula 1, and in this specific episode we're going to be discussing the safety car. Now, safety car will be one of the most frequent occurrences during a Formula 1 race, so if you're wondering how does a safety car work, well, wonder no more, because here I am to explain. The first time a safety car was ever used in Formula 1 was in 1973 during the Canadian Grand Prix. However, it wasn't actually made an official part of Formula 1 until 1993. Unlike in, for example, NASCAR, where sometimes a celebrity will drive a pace car around during certain races, in Formula 1 there is always one designated driver, if you will, and that driver has been since 2000. A former DTM driver from Germany, Bernd Mayländer. So aside from a couple of occasions when he was sick or injured, somebody else of course substituted, but all in all since 2000 I think he maybe has missed two or three races, no more than this. Now, the car that he drives currently is a Mercedes, a modified version of the Mercedes GT road car, meant specifically to suit Formula 1 needs. So, when is Mayländer services being required? How to know when he's needed to go out on the track? Well, actually it's very simple. A safety car is brought out on the track whenever there is a hazard or a danger, imminent danger to, well, either the drivers, teams, audience, spectators if you will, or the track itself. For example, weather intervention, like heavy rain, for example, or an accident, depending of course on the severity and how big the circuit is. On, let's say, a street circuits like, let's say, Monaco, whenever there's a crash, since the track is narrow, safety car will probably come out while the scene is being cleared. While on tracks such as Silverstone, for example, since the track is wide and there is enough room, maybe not. But usually whenever there is most frequently, it is when there has been an accident on the track. And while it's cleared up, safety car will come out. Amongst many things that a safety car does, first of all, it bunches up the field. So a safety car will exit the pit lane. Then on the roof, there is a light, for example, like you see on a police car, for example. Those lights, when the safety car joins, Mr. Mayländer will turn the lights on. They will be orange or yellow, I guess, depending on the vision of the audience, I suppose. And what he will do then is go ahead on the track, wait for the race leader to make his way around the circuit and just join in front of him, causing everybody behind the race leader to form a queue, and everybody in the queue must maintain speed, so they need to go slower. When safety car is out, they are not allowed to overtake one another as well. Now, when a safety, or just before the safety car is due to come out, the drivers will usually rush to the pit lane, as the time that they lose in the pit lane under safety car conditions is much less severe, if you will, than what they would after pitting under normal racing conditions. In case of an accident on, well, the main start-finish line or close to the pit entry, the pit lane will actually be closed. So what will happen then? The safety car will lead the drivers through the pit lane. None of them must stop. So there are no pit stops if a safety car is coming through the pit lane. Alternatively, if there isn't an accident close by to the pit lane will be closed for maybe 2 or 3 laps before the drivers will then be allowed to pit. Now, they can enter the pits in those situations. However, when they exit the pit lane, they have to stop on the pit exit and wait for the green light to come on. This green light will signify then that they can rejoin the track and catch up to the back of the queue. So, during the safety car period, if there are any cars that are a lap behind, they will be allowed to unlap themselves. Now, all cars must unlap themselves. This will be visible when the safety car lights on the roof turn green. Green will then signify those drivers they can overtake the safety car, make their way around the circuit, and rejoin at the back of the queue again on their respective positions. Once they have rejoined the track, one additional racing lap must be completed before the race can actually resume, or sometimes more depending on if the hazard has been cleared or not, or how far along the cleanup has got. So then, safety car is now ending. Drivers are swerving behind the safety car like this to get heat into their brakes and tires to prepare for the restart. When the safety car ends, Bernd Mayländer will actually turn the lights completely off on the roof of the Mercedes, and then will continue to the pit lane, leaving the driver who is in first position to take control of the restart, to control the pace, if you will. Now, usually, when a restart is going to occur, the lead driver will wait for about where the pit entry is to actually speed up, or maybe like to the next, on the very last corner of the circuit, to get a much better exit than their competitors behind, in order to maintain their lead, their position. That is. And then, of course, once the racing has resumed, safety car will then remain in the pits until it is needed again. So then, in case that there has been an accident, but it's not severe enough, it can be cleaned up fairly quickly, or there's just some debris out on the racing line, instead of an actual safety car, Formula One will then deploy what is known as a virtual safety car. Unlike the Mercedes, that is the safety car, virtual safety car is not a physical vehicle. It's sort of like a concept, if you will. This concept meaning that the drivers will still reduce their speed by 35% and will not be allowed to overtake one another. One big difference between the regular and virtual safety car is that the virtual safety car will not result in a queue forming. So all of the drivers will remain on their physical track positions on the circuit, but they will need to reduce their speed. The virtual safety car that is has been in place since 2015, after the unfortunately fatal accident suffered by Gilles Bianchi. When there was a wet Grand Prix and they were going around under normal yellow flags without reducing the speed normally, as they do under a virtual safety car. Of course, he managed to go off the track and hit a tractor. Of course, he passed away from his injuries. So in response to this, virtual safety car, along with many other safety improvements, have been introduced in Formula One. The first official race where a virtual safety car was deployed was the 2015 Monaco Grand Prix. During the virtual safety car period, the drivers need to have a certain delta time, which they must not exceed. So delta time is like a suggested time that will basically be the lap time if they were doing the 35% speed instead of the 100% speed that they can. So if they go over this safety car, they will then, of course, along with overtaking and everything else, will incur a penalty if they go over it for an extended period of time. Aside from the safety car, the Formula One also employs a medical car. Now, medical car isn't as ominous as it sounds. Medical car is simply required to tend to the driver in case of an accident, no matter how severe the accident is, and to help, of course, that said driver then return to either the medical center for further checkups, or just to bring them safely back to, the team's garage. Medical safety car is driven, again, is a designated driver for the medical car. In this case, it is Alain van der Merwe, who is a South African race car driver as well. So both safety car and the medical car have their designated drivers. Medical car will actually follow drivers around on the parade lap, on the formation lap, if you will, and during the first lap as well. So then, after the lap has ended, they will then retreat to the pit lane. They do this because usually starts in Formula One are quite chaotic, and usually most accidents will happen on the restart. The collisions, either somebody going off the track, or just debris scattered around from any sort of contact made. So to make sure everything has been done safely, medical car follows drivers around on the first lap, and in case of an accident, medical car takes maybe 3 minutes to get from the pit lane to, let's say, any part of the circuit. So it is usually a very quick response. Now, aside from Van der Merwe, in the safety car, there is also an FIA licensed medical expert, if you will, which, as I think, as of right now, is one Dr. Ian Roberts. So to both Melander, Van der Merwe, and Dr. Ian Roberts, we thank them for their service in Formula One. Interestingly, the safety car itself was never involved in an incident, nor has it ever caused. Well, caused is a relative term, but it was never involved in an incident. There were no spins from the safety car, but there have been several notable incidents involving both safety car and the medical car. We don't actually have to look far to find the first incident under a safety car, because it happened on the very first appearance made by the safety car in the 1973 Canadian Grand Prix. What the safety car did in that case, since back then there were no timing sheets, like on the screen that you see right now, the difference between drivers' times and their position on the track, it was all done by hand. So the teams were writing down what they thought was the driver's position during the race, and the safety car actually rejoined in front of the wrong driver, the driver who wasn't the leader. This driver in question was actually American driver Haldon Ganley. So the safety car rejoined ahead of him, which meant that every driver who was in front of Ganley managed to gain a lap on him. To make matters worse, he was also declared the winner, even though the eventual winner was his countryman, Peter Revson. So yeah, it didn't take long for a safety car to cause some havoc on the Formula One racing circuit. Now, for the next for the next incident, actually involved a medical car rather than a safety car, and that was in 1995. I think this incident is quite famous because it's well documented and very frequently circles the internet still to this day, and that is the infamous Taki Inoue Hungarian Grand Prix incident. So what happened then is he was driving for a team called Footwork, and his engine blew. So in an effort to help the stewards put out the fire on the engine, Inoue, as of course medical car was coming to his aid, didn't see the medical car, and he was actually hit by it and injured his leg. Later, of course, he was fine, but not that he had much of a chance to do anything in Formula One. Then, 2002 Brazilian Grand Prix. Enrique Bernoldi, who was driving for the Arrows team, crashed into, I think, turn 2, and of course the then medical car driver Alex Ribeiro stopped on the circuit to help Bernoldi get out of the car. However, behind him, unsighted, Nick Heidfeld in his Sauber saw the medical car just in the nick of time, but he wasn't able to avoid it. He lost control of the Sauber, and as soon as Ribeiro opened up the door to exit the medical car, Heidfeld hit the said door. It was also quite a famous incident, and I do not know how nobody was injured in that incident. It was a very tight squeeze by Heidfeld. 2004 Monaco Grand Prix. This race was almost won by Michael Schumacher in his Ferrari. However, after Fernando Alonso tried to overtake his brother Ralf, he actually crashed, and that, of course, being Monaco, brought out the safety car, which then bunched up the field, and of course, like I said, the drivers will swerve left and right to get heat to the tires and their brakes. And Schumacher, of course, did the same thing. However, coming out of the tunnel, the famous tunnel in Monaco, he actually locked up his front wheels a little bit and started to, slide to the left. Behind him, Juan Pablo Montoya tried to avoid Schumacher, but it was a tight squeeze actually, and Schumacher clipped Montoya's right front tire with his left rear tire, and Schumacher slammed into a wall. And there was actually a famous recording, if you will, of Schumacher's destroyed Ferrari coming out of the tunnel in Monaco. Quite dramatic, of course. There wasn't a long wait for the next safety car incident, whether directly or indirectly. It happened in 2007 during the Japanese Grand Prix. Now, what happened in this Grand Prix? Brand new Toro Rosso driver, Sebastian Vettel, was running third at the time, and in front of him there were Mark Webber in Red Bull and Lewis Hamilton in the McLaren. So under the safety car, and heavy rain for that matter, Vettel actually slammed right into the back of Mark Webber, taking them both out of the race. Mark Webber wasn't very pleased with his effort. The very next year, 2008, after another incident, I do not remember who was specifically involved, but a safety car was brought out, And like I said, during those times, the pit lane was closed as soon as the safety car comes out. And again, drivers did go into the pits, and you could see Kimi Räikkönen and Robert Kubica park their car and waiting for the red light to, well, to turn to green, so they can rejoin the track, of course. Now, absent-minded Lewis Hamilton was right behind. I say absent-minded because he failed to stop for the red light, and to make matters worse, he actually slammed right into the back of Räikkönen, taking them both out of the race. And then behind him, Nico Rosberg also slammed into the back of Hamilton. So 3 cars were out on the spot, which actually worked out pretty well for Kubica, who went on to win the race. So if Hamilton steered right instead of left, things could have been very, very different. Moving on a little bit later, in the 2018 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, after 2 Red Bulls collided, safety car was of course brought out while it was cleared, and Romain Grosjean, who was in a Haas, was warming up his brakes and tires as one would normally do, when he lost control completely on his own and slammed right into the wall and lost the wheel in the process, meaning that the safety car period needed to be prolonged, and Grosjean was out of the race. However, this incident, while being funny and embarrassing on its own, wasn't actually what made this incident so iconic. Rather, what made it iconic is the remark by Grosjean, his race engineer, who said, "I think Ericsson hit us." Now, just a little bit of a disclaimer, Marcus Ericsson was nowhere near Grosjean when he crashed. This is going to be quite a controversial one, because it's still fresh in people's minds, and that is the famous 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Now, the race, this was like a championship decider. It was the championship finale, and Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton both went on equal points into this race. Now, Hamilton pretty much controlled the race. From start to finish, he had a measure of everything Red Bull threw at him, and he actually looked set to win his 8th title. Then, 5 laps before the end, with Hamilton had like 12 or 13 seconds over Verstappen in second, Nicolas Latifi tried to overtake Mick Schumacher and crashed. He was blocking the circuit, so actually in this case, quite rightfully, the safety car was brought out. So, while under the safety car is where the whole controversy happens. As I mentioned earlier, all lapped cars must actually overtake the safety car in order to get back to the lead lap. I mean, the race director does have the power to say that no, they cannot do that. It's not mandatory for lapped cars to overtake. So in this case, the race director, again, quite rightfully said no lapped cars will be allowed to overtake. At that point, there were 5 drivers between Hamilton and Verstappen. So Hamilton has lapped them, but Verstappen was yet to lap those drivers. So some negotiating went on between the Red Bull, Mercedes, and the race director Michael Masi, where they told him, don't bring up the safety car, yes, bring up the safety car, red flag the session, don't red flag the session, allow them to overtake, don't allow to overtake, stuff like that. And there was actually quite an interesting remark by a Red Bull team member who said that if we are going to get a motor race on, the safety car will need to be, well, brought in, and we need to have a racing lap. And then, that actually wasn't heard on live broadcast, it was actually heard quite a little bit later. So what happened then is that Michael Masi said that the cars will be allowed to overtake the safety car. However, only those 5 drivers behind Lewis Hamilton and in front of Max Verstappen. Even with that being the case, there still should have been one more lap under the safety car, which in turn would have meant that the race would have finished under the safety car, making Hamilton the champion. So, as soon as those 5 drivers actually overtook the safety car, Masi reverted his decision and immediately brought out the safety car, which meant that yes, we had one more racing lap, which was, ironically, the final lap. Verstappen has pitted under the safety car, so had a fresher set of tires, and, needless to say, he sent a lunge down inside of Hamilton into turn 4, took the lead, and won the title. So yeah, this has been a brief history of the safety car in Formula 1. I will keep doing this series, as rules of Formula 1 of course are ever changing. And so until next time, until next instruction video on how to Formula 1, this has been Lazarus, the channel's name is F1 Help. Please like and subscribe, ring the bell, so you can get notified as soon as I upload something similar to this. Until next time, I bid you farewell.